Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the SFI, given the change for those who applied, so those 2 months before, I think those ones who are opening it, DEFRA has capped the applications at £9,300 based on the average of all those who applied. But given that the average application for a commercial farm, as opposed to a few meadows or pony paddocks, is about 27,000, can you see why farmers aren't really happy with that 9,300 cap?
Yeah, I can see why farmers aren't happy, but it's very important that we control our budgets. If we ended up, this government inherited a £22 billion black hole because the previous government didn't control their budgets. They thought there was a magic money tree. They allocated funding that didn't exist, and they hoped future generations would pay the price for it. We're not going to do that because that doesn't just damage farming, it damages the entire economy. This government will be responsible with taxpayers' money. We're not going to treat it as if it's running out of fashion.
You say about being responsible with taxpayers' money, but in terms of actually giving farmers certainty, in the autumn budget, you, as Chair mentioned, you brought forward the end of BPS early and started the reforms of APR. In November 24, you closed the capital grant schemes and then reopened them in February. In March, you've now closed SFI, and now you've partially reopened them. This doesn't really suggest a government that respects long-term vision, is it?
We inherited a situation where large swathes of British farming is unprofitable. Any sector that can't make profit doesn't have a future. So my intention is to reprioritise these funding schemes so they support farms to transition to models of farming that will enable them to be profitable into the future. Now, my view is that there is an alignment between transitioning to more nature-positive models of farming, therefore reducing your input costs while maintaining yields. We've opened trading opportunities to India, to the United States, to the European Union, all of which we will support farms to take advantage of. We're changing the planning rules so that farmers can more quickly build new facilities to support productivity on their land or convert existing buildings to other uses to get new revenue streams into their businesses. All of this is intended to support farming to become more profitable into the future. We cannot just stand by and continue with a status quo that had left much of this sector on their knees. And the problem, I'm afraid, is not changes to inheritance tax. It's the fact that the whole sector had not been supported with every single lever available to government to become profitable. And my focus is on making this a profitable sector so it has a bright future.
You say about that. Can I ask, have you actually read our government Vision for Farming report yet?
With me here,
Perfect, good. So within that, you talk about supporting, and you rather than just dismissed about the inheritance tax, but obviously that is a huge element of giving long-term support to our farmers to know that they actually have their farms in the future. You talk about diversifying as a means of profitability, but actually they'll get hit by BPR claims under that. So it doesn't quite work together. So will you take our advice and recommendations and speak to the Treasury about delaying the APR and BPR changes to give our farmers that long-term support that they need?
Right. I know that the Treasury is in pretty regular contact with the NFU and other representative bodies, and so am I. So their representations and indeed yours are being heard. But on inheritance tax, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect the farming sector, the agriculture sector, to pay their fair share, just like any other business would. They're only being asked to pay at half the rate of other businesses. Instead of being asked to pay in one go, they can pay it off over 10 years following the death of a farmer. From the Treasury's own statistics, 3/4 would be exempt in any case, but the vast majority of farms will be able to pass on ownership, just as you can with any other valuable asset, 7 years before your likely death, and then pay absolutely nothing at all. So the overwhelming proportion of the sector will not be paying this inheritance tax.
I beg to differ. I think the 75,000 farms that we actually think are affected and all the farming process we've had, you know that is a very different situation.
Do you not think for a moment that those farmers might pass on the farm in their, say, late 60s?
The ones who farmed into their 70s and their 80s, because they were given that advice specifically as being the best means, they maybe don't have 7 years to wait. What happens to them?
I recognise that there is a particular issue at that point.
And what's going to happen for it?
Well, the Treasury has made the announcement. But to be fair, the opposition parties go on as if no farmer will ever hand over ownership while they're in their 60s. The vast majority of them will. And therefore, they will not incur any liability whatsoever.
The NFU and the CLA, as you say, are in constant discussion with Treasury. They came forward with a proposal for clawback over 10 years. Treasury said that would raise much less money. So when they were challenged then, because the analysis that NFU, CLA and others did was that it would raise much the same, the Treasury were asked for their working. It shows why you think it would raise much less money, and they won't release it. That's surely no way to have a respectful dialogue with an industry like this, is it?
Well, I wasn't privy to those particular conversations, so I'm not aware, I'm afraid, Chair. I'm not aware of the details of it, but I do know that the inheritance tax scheme, as it has been designed, will, this is OBR as well, will raise, I think it's £500 million a year for the initial period. That money is helping to fund the National Health Service and the improvements that we need in mental health support and the mental health hubs that will be placed in every community. There are particularly high levels of mental ill health in rural communities. And I think those that say they don't want to raise the revenue to fund for these benefits need to tell us which of these benefits they would cut as a result of changing it.
I think farmers around the country will hear your words and will be shouting at television screens saying, we already pay our taxes. Sarah, do you have anything?
Well, look, I'm staggered by what you've just said there, because the mental health strain is unbearable, and I've heard farmers telling me this weekend about family members planning things they shouldn't be doing to get away from this. So I am really upset to hear you say it like that, because you're saying this money is going to help mental health. Please consider doing this postponement, which will secure much better mental health services across the mental health for our farmers. I'm staggered. I just want to ask one further question, which is just to do with in the future of farming. Do you really feel, so Ed Miliband really has a big plan for large solar, which is going to take land out of food production, and battery energy storage systems, which are toxic if they catch fire. And in your manifesto, you talked about championing British farming whilst protecting the environment. Do you really feel that plans for these large solar farms and toxic battery energy storage systems are going to secure that?
A few months ago, I launched a consultation on the land use framework, and we'll publish the strategy on that in the autumn. What the land use framework does, it was something your party supported while in government, but now opposes in opposition. What the land use framework does, it provides granular data for decision makers, including landowners, about what the best way to deploy their land will be. The information that provides us will help to protect agricultural land, prime agricultural land for food production, and it will identify that land that is most suitable for use for solar farms, so that we can get a win-win here. We need to maintain food security because it's national security. I want to protect the highest producing agricultural land for food production, but we also need to know where are the best places to put solar farms, because we need to we need to support this country to take back control of our own energy from petrochemical dictators like Vladimir Putin, whose actions have caused energy prices to spike massively in this country, damaging farmers as much as anyone else in the country.
I don't think we disagree about getting energy security, that's fine, but solar is only effective about 11% of the time. And I think actually there's other spaces that should be used. Now, you mentioned about the land use framework. One thing that actually from our consultation was that actually there isn't this effective mapping. That was something that was being called for, saying we're not doing enough. There's no talk about proper mapping for where the plans are going to be for solar in the future. But just more to the point, it's a problem now. There's a real tension within that land use framework, because it talks about energy, it talks about food security, and it talks about infrastructure. But the problem is that energy is pushing far ahead, and there isn't that proper plan for the food security in place now. And there are like 1.5% of my constituents to be covered in solar farms in the next 2 or 3 years. The energy sector can push faster then the food policy is coming. So can you just see there's this tension? I just don't think we're going to keep up with it.
But I think the argument you're making is why we need the land use framework and the information that it will provide.
But it doesn't address enough. That's the
well,
problem.
What you're saying is it's not here already, and that's because the previous government didn't publish it and get on with the work. I think they had 3 false starts where they announced dates it would be launched and they didn't launch it. I did launch it. Now it's out there. If the previous government had done it, then we'd be far further ahead than we are. But in 10 months, I've done what your government didn't do in 14 years. So given that you're making a very strong argument actually for the land use framework, I hope your party will change their position and come back to support it.